So thank you again. I'm now going to shift gears a little bit and talk about some research that we're doing here, again led by UNE in collaboration with the University of Vienna and the University of Bristol and also Southern Queensland. And this again is funded by AgriFutures. We're not quite as advanced in this project yet, but I'm hoping to whet your appetite. So I'm hoping you can hear this, and you will remember this from the last presentation. If you were a chicken and you heard this, what would you do? I hope you remembered, and I hope your answer was you would run. It's an alarm call, and it's a functionally referential vocalization, which means it's stimulus specific and it causes a specific change in behaviour of those that receive that vocalization. So what's really cool about these alarm calls as well is not only would this chicken have told you that a predator's coming, but it would have told you if it was an aerial predator, and therefore the appropriate behavioural response would be to go under cover, or if it was a ground predator and the appropriate response would be to jump up in a tree. So these vocalization codes such important information for chickens, and they obviously communicate information where there should be a behavioural response in the receiver. So we think we can use these vocalizations to alter chicken behaviour in industry. So today I want to talk to you about potential applications of this and then also some challenges. So domestic fowl have around 20 to 25 different vocalizations that we know of. And what's really cool is that chicks know their mother by vocalization alone within 3 days post-hatch. And the idea of using these vocalizations to alter behaviour and improve productivity and welfare isn't new. In fact, it was first proposed in 1984, but there's still quite a lot of information we need and a lot we don't know. So we're talking about meat chickens that live to 6 weeks of age, and in typical natural settings, they'd still be with mum within that period of time. So maternal care is probably very important. Chicks learn fundamental behaviours from their mother. They learn how to forage, and not just to forage, but what's good quality feed and what's poor quality feed. They learn how to drink, how to use their home range, and they also learn communication. Now, we obviously know that chicks can survive without mum, but we also see evidence that chicks raised with maternal care have more synchronised behaviour, suggesting more social cohesion in the flock. And important for our meat chickens, they spend more time eating. And so whilst it's not practical to give mother hens to our chicks in commercial farms, it's possible that we could provide some aspect of that maternal care artificially. And in fact, there's been some research to show that mother hen smells or vocalizations or even visual cues associated with mum can actually alter behaviour, productivity and welfare. Most of that research is actually in with layer hens, but certainly suggests that there's opportunities here. The first call I want to propose is the feed call, and the maternal feed call sounds like this. And looks like this on a spectrogram. So you can see it's quite a broad range of frequencies. It's very rapid, short staccato vocalizations. What we know about maternal feed calls is that if they're played for 9 days, the first 9 days of the chick's life, there are productivity improvements. So reduced feed conversion ratio and increased body weight. We don't know what happens after 9 days. Woodcock and colleagues stopped playing the calls after then. And we also don't know what the implications are on welfare. But we know that increased time off feed and water post-hatch is related to increased mortality, reduced weight gain, and higher feed conversion ratio, as well as some short-term implications for organ development. So if we can play this call to get chicks on feed quicker when they arrive at farm, we're potentially going to increase productivity and improve welfare. The second lot of calls I want to talk about is what we call follow me calls. So important for keeping the clutch together and following mother hen. Now, we think this might be useful for free range management. So we know, let's say you're a producer in a very hot state, you let the birds out early morning, they flood out, it's a beautiful time to range. But then by about 11:30 or 12 o'clock, it's getting really hot. And so you want to get the birds inside the shed for welfare reasons and shut up the shed. Currently, the methods we have to do this are maybe not ideal. They scare the birds back into the shed and they're really laborious. So if it takes you 5 minutes per range to get the birds back in the shed, and you have 12 sheds with 2 ranges per shed, that's 2 hours a day that producers are spending trying to get these birds back into the shed, 14 hours a week. So is it possible that rather than scare these birds back into the shed using these techniques, can we attract them back into the shed using these follow me calls? So the 2 follow me calls that we're interested in looking at, the first one is the cluck, and it sounds like this. And you can hear that pesky little chick over the top. This is its distress calls here. What we're interested in is that maternal call underneath, that cluck. And you can see it's very similar to the feed call, but it's got a more narrow frequency band. It's, again, very rapid, but probably not as consistent as that feed call. What we know about the cluck call is that it stimulates following. And if chicks are stressed, but they can hear a recording of the cluck call, they actually have a reduced stress response. So there seems to be some buffering by being able to hear mum in the background. The other follow me call is a roost call, and it sounds like this. So you can hear it's very different. It sounds a bit more like a cat than a chook. I'll play it again. It's this long sustained note, very low in frequency. And this is quite an elusive call. We don't know a lot about it. There's not a heap in the literature about it. And it's hypothesised that this is about getting the chicks into roost at night time. But honestly, there's little known about the context and the receiver's behavioural response. My first thought about this is that the cluck might be, come on, come here. And the roost might be, get in the car. So less frequent, but perhaps better at getting those birds to respond. So this is one of the first things we're looking at, and I've got to state that this is preliminary data, so we've got to be careful about extrapolating too much from this. And also the chicks were 3 days old, which means they're pretty close to mum anyways. But what we did was we measured the distance from the mum when she first started a cluster of one of these calls. So the cluck call, which is the blue line, and the roost call. And from this preliminary data, there's some evidence that they do respond to this cluck call by getting closer to mum, but not so much the roost call. However, we also have to note that the context seems to be different when she's giving these calls, and they seem to already be close to mum when she's giving those roost calls. So watch this space, because we're going to continue collecting this data, and particularly interesting might be after 11 days of age, when they do start to disperse a lot more. So they're the opportunities we think we could use to use vocalizations to alter behaviour. And when we started looking into these, we came across some hurdles. And we have to think about the practicality of actually implementing this in commercial conditions. So we asked a few questions. Well, how loud do we need to play the calls? And where do we need to play the calls from? And how frequently do we need to play the calls? And does this matter? So first, when we asked how loud we need to play the calls, we decided we needed to understand the background noise in the shed, because whatever that is, we need to play it above that so our chickens can actually hear the calls. So this is data from 2 commercial sheds on the first week of life or after placement. And the blue bar is the maximum decibels, so maximum background noise. We can see it's pretty consistent, a little bit of a drop around 8 p.m, but pretty consistent. And that's just sitting under 80 decibels. We see the average just above 60 decibels and the minimum above 50 decibels. So we see here that we need to play our vocalizations over 80 decibels for our chicks to hear. Now, even if someone is telling you you're the most beautiful, intelligent person they've ever met, if they're screaming that in your ear, that's going to be incredibly aversive. And this was one of the questions we had here. If we play these vocalizations above 80 decibels, is that going to be aversive to the chicks? So we did a relatively simple experiment by putting a speaker in the middle of the pen, and we would emit these vocalizations at a range of decibels. And what we expected to see is if it was aversive, the chicks would move out of this zone further away. And there are some differences between the number of chicks in the zones, but that's not what's important here. The important information is the blue bar, which says how many chicks in that same zone close to the speaker before the call, and then the orange after. So we see no evidence that playing these vocalizations, even up to 91 decibels, was aversive. So that's great news. The next question was, where do we play the calls from? So can we just throw some speakers up on the top of the shed and get the behavioural response that we want from the chicks? Or do they need to actually come from the resource? So does the feed call need to come from the feeder? And does the brooding call or the come here call need to come from under a brooder? And this is a really important question that has a lot of economic implications. So you imagine if you needed 10 speakers at $75 on top of your roof, it'd be $750 to implement for a shed, compared to if you put it on every second feeder at $75 a pop, over 10 grand. So this is a really important question, and I was really hoping that we'd be able to share some data on this. But of course, as with everyone's lives at the moment, we were impacted by COVID, but our birds are arriving this Tuesday. So we will have an answer to this shortly. But an important question. And then finally, we asked, well, how frequent should we play these calls? And what is normal? There's a little evidence in the literature that there is variation between hens, particularly in terms of the quality and the frequency, but it's only known for a couple of the calls and only on day 3 and day 9. So we wanted to understand a bit more about what is normal and how much variation between hens and over time we could see. So to answer this question, we got 25 Sussex hens, and we got Sussex hens because they're known for their maternal behaviour. 5 of those went broody, and so under those 5 we put 10 to 12 fertilised eggs. We gave them the eggs at 14 days incubation because we know that communication between the mother hen and the chick starts when they're in the eggs. And then we continuously spied on them. So we had video and audio recordings for each hen. You can see one of our microphone recorders here. And yes, we can afford better nesting boxes at UNE, but we chose these moving boxes so we could actually open them up. You can see here, and we can see what she's doing with her clutch here. And what's really important is when we put all of this together, we can hear what she's saying to her chicks, at what age, what period of the day, and what the chick's behavioural response is for up to 21 days post-hatch. So what we saw is that feed calls are really frequent in the first week of life, which is what we expected. So at 3 days of age compared to 12, compared to 21 days of age, we see more feed calls in the first week. And that makes sense because that's when you want to learn, that's when you want to learn how to feed. We saw no differences in age or time with cluck calls, nor with roost calls, but you can see how infrequent these roost calls are. And what was particularly interesting about this experiment for me is that we had such a variation between our mother hens. So we had some hens that would not say a peep, and we had some other hens, probably like some mothers we all know, that wouldn't shut up. And so such a contrast in maternal styles. And if we think about this in terms of what's known in the literature, and most of that comes from Japanese quail, is that maternal styles are often associated with offspring phenotype, meaning that there's some associations between more aggressive mothers and curious and social chicks. So I think we need to understand that if these maternal styles are coded through these vocalizations, then we may be influencing the chick phenotype. And this may be a real opportunity if we understand it, or a bit of a disaster if we don't. So whilst I would have loved to have shared some data with you today, I hope I have whet your appetite and you can see some opportunities to use vocalizations in the meat chicken industry. So we know that chicks can grow and survive without a mother hen, but there are welfare benefits when she's present. And providing artificial components of the maternal environment can alter chicken behaviour and subsequently improve productivity and welfare and provide management solutions. But there are these practical on-farm considerations that we need to solve first, as well as understand more of the characteristics of the playbacks before this is a reality. So I'd like to thank my collaborators on this project as well. Fantastic team, Jean-Louis Rolt from the University of Vienna, Professor Paul MacDonald from the University of New England, Joe Edgar from the University of Bristol, and Cheryl McCarthy from University of Southern Queensland. And we had a fantastic team of postdocs and technicians and students working on this. And in particular, thanks to Hayley Herriot and Brad Dawson for setting up these really difficult experiments and the technology we need. And once again, AgriFutures for funding the project.